You're listening to Crushing Classical, How to Thrive in Your Creative Career. I'm your host, Jennet Ingle, oboist, entrepreneur, author, and business and creative coach for musicians. In today's podcast, you're going to hear from me about my reed business, Jennet Ingle Reads. I'm going to read from my book about this business, and I'm going to talk about how I could possibly help you with yours. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, podcast listeners. Normally on this podcast, I interview and celebrate someone who is making their own creative way within the world of classical music, who is inventing and creating financial stability and creative freedom for themselves within this realm, and I celebrate those people. Today, I'm actually going to celebrate my own business for a minute or two. I would like to read to you a chapter from my book, The Happiest Musician, How to Thrive in Your Creative Career. Specifically the chapter that deals with my reed business, which has really been seminal for me and been such a contributor to my own thriving creative life. Even though maybe the practice of making reeds isn't actually inherently that creative. It's been so important for me and so relevant to the comfort that I have now in my life and the leadership that I have now in my career. So I want to read this chapter, which is sort of about my origin story and about what this business has become for me. And then at the end, I want to talk just a little bit about what this might imply for you. And as always, when I talk about myself or when I interview anybody else on this podcast, I invite you not only to listen to the words that people are saying, but and celebrate them for themselves, but also always to read between the lines and to think about how this might factor in for you, to think about how magical this might be for you personally. If you spend more than a few minutes a month on billing and scheduling for your teaching studio, you might consider Fonz. It's an all-in-one platform to help service-based businesses like music teachers. In fact, it was originally created by a music teacher to manage their clients and their billing without stress and hassle. It helps you to up-level your presence and show up to your clients and students as the professional that you are. You get a free 2-week trial with the link that you'll find in the show notes. Okay, so this is The Happiest Musician. Chapter 7, Creating a Business. An oboe reed is a delicate little thing. It's made of bamboo, cork, brass, and thread, and handcrafted to the specification of the performer. The reed is the only part of the oboe that actually produces sound. The most expensive, high-quality instrument can still sound like a goose if the reed is not up to the task. The reed is made of organic material and has a short lifespan, during which it's constantly changing, reacting to humidity and barometric pressure, stiffening as it dries and breaking down over prolonged periods of soaking and drying and exposure to the enzymes in our mouths. The reed affects the sound, pitch, articulation, and resistance of the oboe. Making reeds is a time-consuming process involving machines, tools, and extensive skilled hand scraping. Ideally, it takes place over 3 to 4 days to allow sufficient soaking and drying time. We are oboists because we love the sound, the tonal possibilities, the artistry of making music. But we are forced to spend half our time at our desks, messing around with little pieces of damp wood. It's highly skilled work, and I was well-trained and fairly competent at it when I graduated from school. I got a lot better and more efficient after that, as you'll read, but the process didn't stress me out too much. Reed making stresses some people out enormously, though, and young students can't make their own reeds. You don't give sharp knives to 6th graders, so teachers can get overwhelmed with the needs of their studio. Many people simply don't have the time to devote to learning how to make good reeds. Therefore, the business I'll talk about in this chapter was a natural fit for me. Something I was already doing was helpful to others, and I created an income from it. A reed-making business is specific to oboists, maybe bassoonists, maybe clarinetists. But as you read, I'd invite you to think about something you could do or make that would be a benefit to people like you. I know a woman who makes and sells fabric mute bags that hang over your chair, so the mutes are always an easy reach away. I see people creating hooks to take the weight of the instrument, or making better thumb rests, or re-hairing bows. In our current times, of course, there's a market for orchestral PPE, masks through which you can play an instrument, bell covers, etc. My oboe reed business didn't start out like much. My origin story is very much of its time and resonant with the way I tackle things in my life, small, then evolving messily and with no real intention toward success. I got smarter and savvier, but in the beginning I just took the steps that presented themselves. I started out making reeds for one person. She was an active freelancer, much higher on the ladder than I was at that time. She was rehabbing from a hand injury and couldn't keep up with her own reed-making needs, so she hired me to make them for her. I charged her something like $10 or $12 per reed. I made her 5 or 10 every week, and I drove to her house to deliver them in person. As part of my service, I filed down and greased the corks to make them easier to insert and remove. This was a lot of work for not that much money, but I was also in my 20s, living in the world's tiniest apartment, trying to break into the scene, and her checks netted me much more per hour than my minimum wage day job did. I was making reeds for myself anyway, right? It wasn't much more effort to make a few extra in every session, and every little bit of income helped. As her hand problems resolved, after several years of working together, she went back to making her own reeds, and I missed the sense of purpose, the income, and most of all, the efficiency. There's a big difference between making reeds just for yourself and making them for yourself and others. If I'm working only for myself, I prepare only as many as I think I'll need, and then I try to make each one a gem. In contrast, if I'm trying to make a case full of basic, competent reeds, I can go a lot faster. I can enjoy some economies of scale. I can batch process and let my reeds be on an assembly line of sorts. Because of this efficiency, I wind up with a high percentage of good reeds with a lot less emotional attachment. For me, a reed business was a fantastic way to hone my skills and improve my processes, independent of the actual income. Have you read that story about the ceramics teacher? I feel like I see it everywhere. It's from the book Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland. Here's my quote. The ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he was dividing the class into 2 groups. All those on the left side of the studio, he said, would be graded solely on the quantity of work they produced. All those on the right solely on its quality. His procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring in his bathroom scales and weigh the work of the quantity group. 50 pounds of pots rated an A, 40 pounds a B, and so on. Those being graded on quality, however, needed to produce only 1 pot, albeit a perfect one, to get an A. Well, came grading time, and a curious fact emerged. The works of highest quality were all produced by the group being graded for quantity. It seems that while the quantity group was busy churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group had sat theorizing about perfection and in the end had little more to show for their efforts than grandiose theories and a pile of dead clay. End of the quote. In other words, making more reeds was good for me financially and artistically, so I wanted more customers. I wrote a letter, printed out 100 copies on paper with an order form on the back, stuffed them into envelopes, and mailed them with stamps and handwritten addresses to every oboist in the Chicago Federation of Musicians Union Directory. This was a weird time, right? The late 90s? It's not that the internet didn't exist, but social media certainly didn't, and the thought of having my own website, wasn't even a concept in my mind. I barely had an email address. I came out of college without having had any online experiences. Conservatory education, mid-90s. Reaching out globally was not a thing I considered. But listen, it is indeed a good business idea to reach out to people who know you to find your first clients, to people who are in the very specific niche that you want to serve. On the one hand, I can laugh at my 24-year-old self licking 100 envelopes. On the other hand, if I were going to start something new right now, I'd look for the people in my life who might be interested and contact them directly. It was a savvy move, clunkily executed. But I got a customer. Then a few weeks later, I got another. Then the first customer sent some students to me for reeds, and it wasn't too long before my business started growing, all by word of mouth. I made some smart business moves early on without knowing anything or strategizing in advance. I rapidly enabled a monthly read subscription service. Normally, you would send me a check in the mail for reads, after which I would make the reads and send them out to you, and the whole process would take a few weeks. But if you subscribed, you would get a small discount, and I would send your reads reliably on the 5th of the month and invoice you. The advantage to me? Predictable workflow and predictable income. I've tweaked this process many times over the last 20 years, but I still offer a technologically improved version of that subscription service. It's a win-win. The lesson? Look for ways to make it easier for your people and for you. I discovered that if I sent out a friendly letter to people who had ordered before, with an order form on the back, still in an envelope with a stamp, because tech was slow to develop for me, I would get an influx of orders. In this way, a tiny newsletter was born. The lesson? Communicating with your people is important and magical and basically always a good thing for them and for you. It's worth the effort to stay at the top of your customer's mind. I discovered that when I bumped my prices up by $1 or so every few years, I had a lot of personal feelings about it. A lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. But those feelings never translated to reduced sales. Feelings around money are normal, and I still struggle with them, but it literally never happened that someone saw my read prices go up by $1 and called to yell at me. In fact, as my prices went up, my business grew. The lesson? Money is a mental game. The agonies you go through around your pricing don't have to translate to agony for others. I discovered that it was useful to track my reads and orders and customers, and I created a spreadsheet that gave me all of the information I needed. It was imperfect and unsearchable, but I'm using a version of that same spreadsheet today. I briefly tried to move to a much more professional customer and inventory management system, but it proved to be more than I needed for my purposes, and it was so complex I couldn't manage it myself. My tracking system is clunky, but with it I can follow the trends I need to follow. The lesson? Keep it simple, and let your systems be what you need them to be. I eventually learned to create a basic website, slowly figured out how to accept payments online, and then gradually improved and added to and built up my own site until I outgrew my own tech skills and hired someone to redesign it. The lesson? It doesn't have to be great at first. Just make it easy for someone to find you and pay you. If I could make my own first website, as a person who came of age before the internet, you certainly can too. As I got more comfortable with my systems and processes, as I began to know how to make my read business fit into my life without stress, I wanted to grow it. I realized that selling a fully finished read was actually limiting, as it meant my customers were only those people who couldn't, or preferred not to, make reads at all. I wanted to reach oboists who were already making their own reads too, so I began to offer earlier stages of the process. Half-scraped reads, reed blanks, processed cane, unprocessed cane, knives and tools and supplies. All of the things I had to have and create to get a finished read out the door could be sold independently. They'd save someone plenty of time and effort, and as my business grew, I could really take advantage of those economies of scale. I could acquire cane more cheaply by buying it by the kilo from the grower. I could access dealer pricing on tools and supplies. The lesson? Be creative, and don't assume that people only want one version of the thing you do. I experimented with online ads and with advertising in our trade publication, but these didn't spark joy for me, or work terribly well. The oboe niche is very small, and word of mouth has always been my best driver. When I started my YouTube channel, though, my business really took off. I created the 5-minute Reed Maker video series in 2017, at first just to answer some of the questions I was getting. People would email me and say, "I love the reads you sent me, but they are too hard, or too easy, too unstable, too closed, too open, etc. for me. What should I do?" Now, this is not too surprising. Reads are very individual. What feels good to me might not work for another person I've never met. I wrote a lot of emails back saying things like, "Thanks for getting in touch. I'm glad to have the opportunity to improve your experience. Can you be a little bit analytical about how the read is too hard? If it's too hard in the response, slow to tongue on but easy enough once it gets going, you would want to scrape in the tip from the gutters of the rooftop up to the corners. If it's too hard in the sustain, you can start a note easily but have to work hard to maintain sound quality. You might want to very gently polish the heart area. If it's too open, you might want to squish it with your fingers, after it's thoroughly soaked, of course, and try again. Too flat in the high register, and thus exhausting to play, you might wish to clip a tiny bit. If you are not successful with these fixes, you can send it back to me and I'll try a second time to get you something that you can use. Let me know how it goes." I was pretty good at putting on this cheerful, helpful voice instead of getting triggered by people not liking my reads. But I definitely got tired of writing that email. So I made some videos. What to do when your read is too hard, too easy, unstable, etc. These got very popular, so I made more. So many more. I talked about the various stages of reed making, the skills, and the adjustments I make. I gave away all the information I could think of for free on YouTube, and the more I gave away, the more people reached out to me with questions and also ordered from me. The lesson? Be helpful. People want to learn, and if you can teach them, they see you as the expert. It turns out that when you have helpful advice for people and you show up and say so, people listen. I've built a great, joyful, and loving audience of oboists through that YouTube channel, and I've been listening to them and serving them ever since. They ask questions, I make videos to answer them, I get better at the work through having to break it down and describe what I'm doing, and they get the help they need. It's synergistic and energizing. The lesson? Helping people helps you. Before I started my channel, I ran a weekend oboe reed boot camp in the summer, mostly for my own students, and had a few additional local folks enroll. We had a good time for several years. It was growing slowly, by word of mouth. The year after I started my channel, though, when I ran boot camp again, I was able to bring people together from much farther away. At its pre-pandemic peak, I was filling the room and meeting people from Texas, Colorado, even Canada, who came to South Bend to spend the weekend together and make reeds. When I demonstrated skills, people caught me in mistakes and quoted me back to me. This is the power of building a following. What's the lesson here? When you have an audience, many things become possible. Between my YouTube channel, my blog, and my weekly email newsletter, I've recently begun to feel like my main job in my business is creating content, and only secondarily creating reads. And this feels fantastic to me. It keeps my life interesting, creative, and open, and everything I share is something that comes back to me. I started by working with little pieces of damp wood and created an entire community. In 2019, my reed business income stream hit 6 figures. That top line dropped somewhat during the pandemic, but it's still a huge piece of my portfolio career. This chapter is the story of my 21-year path to overnight success. To be clear, it did not have to take that long. I didn't have any vision for the business when I started it. I was looking to bring in a little extra income to help with the rent and groceries, not to build an empire. And for a long time, for years, that's exactly what I did. My business grew only through word of mouth and developed very slowly. The workload was manageable around my playing and teaching, and it did enable me to leave my day job well before my performing career alone could have supported me. It gave my husband and me a feeling of stability, as every week another 2 or 3 checks or deposits would show up. They were small, but they just kept coming, enhancing and confirming my feeling that the money would always come from somewhere. I didn't have to start the YouTube channel that wound up dramatically growing my audience and customer base. I did that because it seemed like fun, because it was a pleasure for me to be creative in that way. I find generally that when I lean into the things that feel enjoyable to me, people respond well. The lesson? I took something I was doing anyway, making reeds, and improved my skills by making a lot of them. I was adequate at reed making when I started my business. I was getting by, but having to ship quality reeds regularly forced me to get consistent and fast. The more reeds I made, the better they got. Over time, I also evolved my sense of myself as a business owner. I got smarter and savvier about how to keep up with demand, how to market myself and my products, and how to communicate with my audience. And I turned the business into something very profitable. I have no background or training in business. If I could create this, you can too. So let me ask how this sat with you. Is there anything in your own life that you do so easily that it doesn't even feel like work for you, or that you have to do anyway for the job that you have, for the instrument that you play, for the thing that you do, that feels like effortless fun for you, that other people struggle with, that other people ask you about? I wonder if there's room in there to monetize that thing. I wonder if that's something that strikes you as being desirable or interesting. And I wonder what it might mean for you to have an additional income stream happening that was relatively easy for you to create and deliver and produce, that gave you a little bit of stability so that as your performing career goes up and down week by week, changes, there's income just sort of happening around the edges. I wonder what it would feel like to have an extra $100, extra $1,000, extra $5,000 just like sitting in your account every month based on this thing that you already know how to do and that you're already doing. And specifically, if you're already a reed maker, an oboist, a bassoonist, maybe a clarinetist or a sax player, I don't know, but if you're already a reed maker and you're wondering what it would be like to start your own reed business or to develop the small one that you have now into something that brings in like grown-up levels of money, helpful levels of money, if this is interesting to you, but you're just not sure where to start or how to make your next move, I am going to be offering some programs for people just like you, some helpful I want to be helpful. I have a resource that you will be able to find in the show notes, and I hope that you will check that out. You know, I've been doing this for such a long time, and I am so ready to talk about all of the sort of sticky details and the ins and outs of how this business works, mistakes I've made, things I've done right, and things that you could do to grow your own reed business much faster than I did. If this feels interesting, please do check out my little resource at the link in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe on your app of choice and leave a review too. It really helps us. Don't forget to check out Fawns if your own teaching or service-based business needs better systems. You can use the link in the show notes for a free 2-week trial. Our theme music was composed by Dream Vance. You can hear his first album, Re-Entry, on Spotify and Apple Music, and follow him there for more innovative synthwave music. You can find me at jennetingle.com, which is also where you can pick up a copy of the Happiest Musician book. Reach out to me with thoughts or questions about the podcast, or apply for a free clarity call to explore your own portfolio career and thriving musical life. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.